You had a fantastic episode with Ari Bierman recently where you sort of laid out some of the different prospects for reforming the court and made the case that, should Democrats have legislative control after the election, they really need to make court reform a priority. But it also seems like there's kind of an order of operations that needs to happen here. So walk us through, I guess in your best case scenario, what does that look like? And then maybe what do you think is more realistic to actually move forward?
One of the reasons Ari Berman is one of my favorite amicus guests is he's encyclopedic when he thinks about democracy, structural, big, boring structural democracy reform. And so you're exactly right. I think that we tend to fall into this kind of roller coaster horse racy, we're going to fight about Donald versus Kamala. We're going to fight about Vance versus Walz. And then after election day, we can all go back to sleep. And I think what Ari and people like you and anybody who's thinking about sustainable structural democracy reform is well aware that in many, many ways, American constitutional democracy was crafted to suppress democracy. And whether it's the Electoral College, right, and how completely distortive that is, the way the Senate works, totally distortive, right? The filibuster, utterly distortive. Every one of those things exists to suppress democracy as you and I understand that. And so I think the first piece of this is not just the court. Probably Ari would say it's statehood for, DC and Puerto Rico. And, it's doing away with the Electoral College. It's doing away with, the way we currently, gerrymander districts, right? So it's all of that stuff that we tell ourselves makes us free and makes our vote count. And in fact, what it's doing is elevating the very same people that the founders sought to elevate in the first. It's working, yay, we're still doing it, right? That's the first chunk of it. And then the second part of it is, what do we do about the court? Which again, exists in some ways to privilege minoritarian interests. And we like that, right? Because we can't have everything be decided by majority rule. And the way we got Brown versus Board and the way we got Roe v. Wade and the way we got Obergefell, marriage equality, was a court that was privileging minority interests. But we now have a court, and this is the most important thing I'm going to say, in which 5 of the 6 conservatives seated on the court, and Ari said this on my show, were seated by presidents who lost the majority vote, and then they were affirmed by a Senate that represents vastly less than the majority of the country, right? So that California has 2 votes and South Dakota has 2 votes. So what we would need to do is ask ourselves not just why we have a minority rule court, that's fine, that's structural, but why we have a minority rule court that is fighting to privilege minority rule system, even in the face of efforts at democracy reform. And that's the whole line of cases that sets aside the Voting Rights Act, that's Rucho, right? That's all the cases that say, we're going to suppress the vote because we're the Supreme Court. And so what I want people to ask themselves is not this question of how do we, take away the court's, God-given oracular authority, but do we really want a court that is itself entirely a product of the framers' kind of debased ideas of protecting, privileged white men? And we're going to let that court take away the right to vote for everyone else. And I don't know if I've said that clearly enough, but I really think it's important to understand this is not a court that we have ever seen in history. This isn't even the FDR busting court of, the New Deal. This is a court that represents very moneyed, very self-interested minority that is trying to break democracy. And so then the last chunk of your question is, what do we do about the court? Not just about fixing the filibuster and fixing gerrymandering and fixing the Electoral College. What do we do with the court itself? And there the answer is, like you say, there's a pull down menu. And at the extreme end, there's, adding 4 seats, right? Or what we call court packing, which, by the way, is entirely plausible because we added seats every time we added a circuit until we stopped doing that, right? So technically we should have 4 more seats. There's a lot of conversation about term limits. And by the way, term limits polls extremely well. Unlike court packing, the American public loves it. And I think that the work we have to do is sort of help listeners and readers understand that it's not enough to say, I hate the decision in Dobbs, or I hate the decision, in Bruin, that was the gun case that gave us bump stocks last year, and I'm mad. I think that it's that second step, which is, and I'm going to keep, doesn't matter who wins the presidency. I'm going to keep getting those decisions unless we think about the court. And it's that second piece of connective tissue that I think it sort of feels a little like, yeah, that's a big lift. But it's also like very good, smart people are working on all of these things. And I think it's doable. Like, this is not unicorns and rainbows. There are ways to implement these democracy fixes. And my sort of very upbeat landing on this is like, imagine if we actually tried democracy. It might be awesome, but we haven't yet really tried. And so we haven't yet found out. And if people, I think, could kind of get out from under the boulder of, I hate the court, but there's nothing I can do, which is, I think, where we live, most of us, I think that there is stuff we could do. And then I think we could have a court that really was part of a process of perfecting America in a way that we've actually not ever really even tried.